Are there any apologies for absence?
Yeah, apologies from Peter Saggers.
Okay. Morgan?
Yeah, Peter Saggers.
Okay. And item 2, is there any declarations of interest? Okay. I'm not going to bother calling the roll because you can actually see the participants online. So minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have a problem with the minutes of the previous meeting? And if you're not on mute, Helen Carmichael, would you kindly go on mute? So are there anyone have any problems with the minutes of the previous meeting? Can we agree those then, please? Okay, we'll move swiftly on to item 4. God, aren't these fast compared with the full council meetings? And I'll hand straight over to David Goldie, who's going to do a short presentation regarding the paper. David.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members. This report provides an update on the Workforce Planning and Development Project. The project scope is attached as an appendix to the report. The project's been taken forward by a project team comprising of staff with management and supervisory responsibility across council services. Councillor Caddick and Councillor Bremner and John Gibson from Unison are the redesign board reps on the project board. The team's met 5 times since August. There are 3 main parts of the project. The first is reviewing the council's existing workforce planning strategy. The second is looking at workforce data and the sort of information that managers need to effectively undertake workforce planning. And the third aspect of the project is about identifying the management tools that are required for managers. So the report covers each of these 3 issues in turn. A member redesign workshop was held on the 7th of August to get feedback from members on the current workforce planning strategy. But also part of the strategy review, the project team designed and issued a questionnaire to all 677 staff with management and supervisory responsibilities in the council. So the closing date for this survey was the 6th of October, and we had 254 responses to that, which is just over 37% response rate, and that's considered to be a pretty good response rate for a survey of this type. So we're currently analysing the responses to the survey, and I'm sure we're going to get some really valuable information on what managers and supervisors feel is important to them in terms of workforce planning, and the findings will be discussed with the project team just as soon as we've done the analysis. The questionnaire isn't really the best method for capturing qualitative information on workforce planning, so we're also planning to undertake a series of workshops with managers and supervisors to get more in-depth feedback on some of the issues that are facing them in relation to workforce planning. So sessions are planned for the 15th, the 21st and the 28th of October. And there's around 50 managers signed up for those workshops. So again, I think that's going to get some really valuable information at a more qualitative level about managers' experience of workforce planning and what they feel they need going forward. The second aspect of the project relates to workforce data. So as well as informing the strategy review, the questionnaire and the workshop are going to help us identify what information managers need in order to undertake workforce planning in terms of knowledge of the workforce and other things like that. So there is a separate workforce data project, which Liz is also the sponsor for, and that's running in parallel with this project, and it's looking at in more detail about the IT and systems issues in relation to gathering, storing and reporting workforce data. And the third strand of the project relates to the management tools that managers need in order to deal with workforce planning as a sort of integral part of their management role. And I think that will follow logically from the feedback we get from the current strategy and through the questionnaire and the workshop sessions and the outcomes of the data project. So It also will draw together related work in relation to leadership, culture and performance, and another work streams related to overall council redesign. So overall, I think the project is making progress against some fairly tight time scales, and I think we're going to get some really valuable information from the questionnaire and from the workshops that will help inform the final parts of the project. So that's all I intended to say. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the final point that you actually make, David, is one of the important things. Is probably at the start of this, pace wasn't particularly fast, but pace really has begun to pick up now. And I think it's really important that we keep the emphasis on this, and that pace becomes ever more important. I've got Paul McPherson who wants to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I better just take my coos out of the picture. It's about pace that you've just mentioned there. When you look at the original workforce planning strategy, the paper says, it's 2017 to 2023. But this new paper is now saying there's a long-term strategy, just go to the appendix, for the next 3 to 6 years. So is that 3 to 6 years from now, or is that 3 to 6 years from 2017? Because I thought a lot of this work had already been done.
Liz, I think you wanted to come in.
So the comment was actually on the pace, and just to say that it is absolutely recognised that the pace needs to continue with this project. We've got deadlines that are set in the appendices. I know these are very challenging deadlines, but we just need to make sure, and we will now make sure that we put the resources around that to ensure that those deadlines will be delivered to them.
Carolyn.
Thanks, Kavina. Yeah, I think that I accept that COVID put an awful lot of challenges on people over the summer, and people were still trying to do other jobs as well as their own jobs. And it will continue to be so, I think, for the next year. But I think we started this project almost before COVID, in terms of we needed to look at the restructuring, and COVID has just made it more urgent, I think, probably. And I think getting the project plan out that we have now with the timelines in it has focused the minds, and that's what we really needed to do. We needed to focus on this. I think it's great that we've done a review, and Paul was talking about a lot of work had already been done. What I am not convinced about it is that we did the work and it got parked. The strategy got parked somewhere, and some of managers were adhering to it and took it on board, but I'm not convinced everybody necessarily was actively pursuing that workforce planning strategy. And I think there were a number of reasons why they weren't able to do it, and a lot of that was to do with the tools and the data, which is why I think it's really important that we do focus on these, because workforce planning is not an HR activity, it's a management activity, and HR are there to support and to facilitate the management of people within the organisation. But this is a management activity, and managers have to be able to access data when they need it, not have to ask HR for it, or have a time delay of 2 or 3 weeks or months before they get certain reports back. So I think it's all about how do we enable our managers to be better managers, and that's enable them to do their job. Now, workforce planning is not just about that, but this is the starting block for understanding how workforce planning works. We need to know who's doing what, where they're doing it, and how much we're spending on it, and all this sort of stuff. And that actually has been quite difficult up until now. So I think the review was necessary. I think it's got twofold. First, when we do ask questions, we are trying to find out what's gone wrong with it and where we can help people. But it's also refreshing people that people are meant to be using it, and it's there, and it's a tool to help them. So I think it does two things here. We are doing a review, but it is a refresher to a lot of managers. And I think the qualitative sessions will be really interesting, because the questionnaire is a really good testing the water, but the qualitative sit-down sessions with the managers, which will be mixed, and we'll talk about all the issues and hopefully share best practice, because there's some really good practice going on as well. I think are very valuable, but I'm just thankful that we've now got a plan in place with deadlines that are focusing the mind, because that's what we needed. And the only other thing I wanted to add was there's so much else going on, and Liz talked about that, but the work, the leadership and performance stuff that is also going on, which is integral to our new structure that we have all voted for as members. This new structure's got to work, and we need to help them make it work. So I think the workforce planning, it runs in tandem with the leadership performance stuff, and also the council restructure in terms of what we're going to be able to afford to do and what services we want to provide and all that sort of stuff. But it's all got to knit together. But I think we ought to be doing what we need to be doing on this one particular project, and I'm delighted that we've got traction. Thank you.
Well, in direct response to your question, I think organisations like this, workforce planning should be almost a permanent function. So when you get to the end of any timeline, you should be continuing this on ad infinitum. So workforce planning is something we should always be doing, and maybe the fact that we haven't done it particularly well in previous years shouldn't stop us from doing it in the future. Derek Loudon.
Thanks. Yep. Enjoyed having a read of this. I think there's a few things I'll try and pick out. One, I'm assuming that the sort of much discussed skills audit would form a part of this, so that managers would be able to find out if there are already people in the organisation who have the kind of skills that they'd be looking for when a vacancy arises. And you know, I'm hoping it isn't going to be silos and individual services will only have access to the skills audit for their particular service, because as I've said often before, you know, people can come into this organisation maybe as a cleaner because that was the only job in the Highlands that was available at that point, but they may have a degree in nuclear physics, you know, so it's to try and pull that out and make sure that workforce aspirations feed into this, so that, you know, if people want to find a job that's more in keeping with their skills, that this process will allow them to do that. I think another issue that's come up more recently, and not something I've been harping on about for ages, is succession planning. Maybe as a result of COVID, we're a bit more focused than we would have been before. What happens in the event that a manager has to socially distance or isn't available in the managerial role? What do we have in the way of succession planning to allow those managerial roles to be swiftly filled in the event of a vacancy? And I'm hoping that can be factored in as well. And I'll leave it at that.
Liz, there's a couple of points there. Maybe either you or David can maybe answer those.
Yep, certainly happy to try to do so. I think in terms of the skills audit, the aspirations, absolutely. As well as the workforce planning project, we also have the workforce data project, and obviously they're absolutely aligned. And we're looking at, so as part of workforce planning, we are looking to see what is the gap in the data that we currently have. And of course, the workforce data is going to ensure that we capture that data, and that will be done centrally. But I think it's important to say, I mean, as members will be aware, we're looking at service redesign just now. And as part of that, we are capturing lots of data. The ECOs are holding their initial sessions this week, and the walls upstairs in committee room 1 and 2 are full of data that's been captured all around the lines of the things that you were looking at, Councillor Loudon. So we want that to be in the centre. We want to make sure that officers can get that information instantly And the same with succession planning. We've been looking at the demographics. It's a bit scary, some of it. What workforce planning won't do is determine how we will take this forward, but it will make sure that we have the information to allow the managers to take it forward. But that will definitely be part of this.
Muriel.
Thank you, Chair. Just to absolutely agree with the previous speakers, I mean, any successful organisation must have good workforce planning, and it must be supportive workforce planning as well. And if we learn any lessons from COVID, we need to think on our feet very quickly and make sure that we're talking about data, but we're talking about people here, and we have the right people with the right skill set to be able to and offer them opportunities. For instance, there are staff that have been shielding, and I know a member of staff that's been shielding and felt that they were just dumped. They weren't required for anything. Now that member of staff could and should be given the opportunity to contribute. They've got loads of experience there, and because they fall into a category doesn't mean to say they're not good for the organisation. So I feel quite strongly about that. And I think it was Councillor Caddick mentioned a management activity. Of course it's a management. Any manager that is appointed knows that is part and parcel of their role, of their team performance, identifying the skill sets of their team, and they can have whatever categories they want, whether it's RAG or whatever it is sitting there. And a good manager knows that, for instance, Councillor Caddick has started at role X, but she wants to learn to become a nuclear physicist. So if I'm not being facetious here, but you know, get to know your staff and what opportunities can come up. And it's true, sometimes we get focused into little silos because I'm a manager at Team A and I don't speak to Team B. So we need to reinforce this. And the other thing is, for managers and for staff as well, we have one thing Highland Council has done well, particularly, I'll use the example of education, is we've developed our online learning skills. Well, online learning for staff and managers as well, that can be done. And it's easy when you've got online learning modules to know that Muriel hasn't completed her health and safety certificate or whatever. And that is usually fully supported by our union colleagues. But I'll stop there. Sorry for rambling on.
I'm really disappointed you haven't completed your health and safety certificate, Muriel. So I've got Paul. Has your hand disappeared for a reason, or did you want to speak again? You were next.
Oh, right. Thanks, Bill. No, I suppose it was maybe to quantify my first point I was trying to make around pace, etc. Myself and union colleagues have been part of discussions around restructures for services, and those stalled, and we were told that these were going to be picked up because the council was going to be redesigned and look at these structures. But as a staff representative, I always come back to the concerns, the pressure that's left on staff to fulfill posts and structures that needed to be developed back many years ago. And I'd appreciate what you're saying, workforce planning is ongoing, but we're at a point, and we're using COVID now, but COVID isn't an excuse, because COVID wasn't here 2-3 years ago when we should have been doing what we're now doing, and we're just saying, well, COVID is now more prevalent, so we've now got to push this on. I suppose I don't agree with that comment.
Actually, I think, Paul, we need to look to the future here, and the future of the whole organisation has to revolve around probably the most important thing that we do, which is workforce planning. And if we head out from this on the basis that we're taking this forward with as much pace as possible, the fact that a few years ago, in fact, even less than a few years ago, we didn't do this particularly well, I don't think is a reason to stall what we intend to do now, and hopefully we'll take this forward. But But as we've always said in the redesign board, we can't do redesign of anything without the contributions of staff. Contributions of staff are the most important contributions that can be made. So hopefully that gives you some confidence that we intend to do it this time. And that, as Caroline mentioned right at the start, we did get to a point and we probably just parked it. I hope you'll appreciate that this time round, there's no intention for this to be parked. So
yeah, no, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, Bill. But yeah, I do need to have that confidence that we are going to push this forward.
Okay, it's a legitimate question, Paul. There's no doubt about it, because from previous experience, you can see we didn't carry out what we said we were going to do. But I have a feeling that this time we will. At least that's my personal feeling. John Gibson.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Thanks, David, for the report as well. Just a couple of things about one is the skills audit. It's something we have spoken about before. If someone is in a post at the present moment and their post is being deleted or it's no longer required, we look at that, how we can redeploy that person. In order to do that, we get them to fill up a form, and we're asking them to identify all the skills they have, not the skills that they have just to do their job at the moment. And that can quite often then be a revelation as to what actually other abilities people have. And it's right about the workforce data. We need to understand not what we're employing people to do, but also what their abilities are, because that can be two different things. And again, somebody mentioned it about silos. And again, we quite often do see that, is that if a post is going in a particular service, the managers look for another post within that service, as opposed to looking for it within the whole of the Highland Council. And that's why HR oversee that, because they've got the broader picture. So we need to make sure that we encapsulate all of that and get the right skills and identify people's abilities and be able to use that as best we can. There was only one other thing that I was going to commentate on was timescales. I mean, Paul's right. Paul and I have been involved in discussions about workforce planning for many a year. Sometimes you think, oh, again, but you're right, it is a continuing thing. But when you've discussed it for a number of years and nothing comes out of it, sometimes you need to get that new refocus, and that's probably where we're at. But we talk about timescales, and it's mentioned here on page 11 of the document. And I just want to say about the very last bit, we're talking about long-term, 3 to 6 years with update versions for the council. That concerns me a little bit, because if anything over the last 6 months has taught me to understand is that long-term planning of more than a few years can be sometimes a little bit too claustrophobic, because actually there can be a major change and all of a sudden we have to change all our plans. So we're looking at workforce planning, and we're also talking about the possibility of long-term 3 to 6 years. But actually next May we're going to have a local government election, and the new people who may come in may have a completely different view from the people who are there. Yet we have a plan that's for 3 to 6 years. So we need to just be careful that if we do that plans for that length of period, that somehow we build in reviews, the possibility for reviews and change. Thank you.
You've got more confidence about the local government deadlines than I have, John. And by the way, it's not next year, it's the year after. It's the Scottish parliamentary elections next year. And if they go ahead, then your guess is as good as mine, I'm afraid.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to have sacked you all a year early.
I'm sure some of us would have been delighted if you were correct, John. Raymond.
Thanks for the clarification, convener. I've just picked myself up off the floor because of the heart attack that I just had there just now. John, don't do that again. Local government elections next year and Scottish parliamentary elections, a double whammy, really? Anyway, John, a lot of what you said there just now has been part of the discussion, as you know, with those of us who are involved in this project. And you're right. I'm not going to repeat everything that everybody else has said. Carolyn, very eloquently paraphrased it all when she first spoke. But to go back to the point that Paul's making there just now for some reassurance, yeah, the restructure at council has not stopped. We've gone through some substantial restructuring just in the past few months, and council knows that. And it's not missed on members either, the fact that when you're talking about 2017 to 2023 and the workforce planning document that's already available online, you'd probably find that most members didn't even know that that document existed, and that's why it landed up being included at the beginning when we were first reviewing this. Those of us who are working at the coalface in this know that was emailed out by Councillor Caddick at the start. But it's a changing picture, and this, if we were to look at the point that Carolyn was saying earlier on, where we have managers and who we would expect to understand what workforce planning is all about. It's an incorporated element of the job, and actually that's one of the things that we expect, or we're hoping to see, comes back in the questionnaire for those of us who've been involved in the shaping of it, is understanding how many managers out there actually even know about workshop planning. Now, if that's not been happening in the past 3 years, there's a commitment to make sure that that happens from here on in. And I think it's all these kind of examples, Paul, in terms of understanding. It's not the fact that 2017 to 2023, that document wasn't fit for purpose. Lots of it probably is fit for purpose. The only thing is, it's not been rolled out in the manner that we need to have it rolled out. This will. And that's a big part of, hopefully, a big part of the reassurance for you there, Paul. It's the commitment and the foresight of this particular project that will deliver where the last one didn't. So your 2017 to 2023, once this one's finished, will be your workforce planning document that everybody can buy into. But there will be a commitment for everybody to buy into, because this questionnaire will already have managers' expectations heightened. They will be looking to understand what is workforce planning. If they've answered that they didn't know about it, or they didn't know about the document, they will be expecting to know what that is now, because they've stated that to this group. We now need to deliver on that. So I hope that gives you, along with what the convener has said there just now, and Carolyn and some of the rest of us, those of us who are at the coalface of delivering that. Hopefully that gives you a real confidence boost where maybe that's been lacking, Paul, over the period of time previous, and I get that kind of impression from you. So your point's well made, the impression that you've given to us is well made, and it's up to us to now be able to deliver on that for you. And I hope that you take away a lot of confidence from this, that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, thanks for that, Raymond. I appreciate it.
Liz.
In response to John's question about workforce planning and changing priorities in 2 years' time, or the potential, I think one of the fundamental things is that we need to be considering that just now in the workforce planning. So for me, it's part of how do we make sure that we've got a flexible workforce, that as priorities change, which they will. I mean, we're dealing with a COVID situation just now. We need a workforce that can move between one area and another. All of that needs to be considered in terms of workforce planning. So I'm hoping that with the lessons that we've learned through COVID, that may assist us in thinking about the longer term. Now, we've got no plans yet. This is just part of the review, but we have to learn lessons from the situation with COVID, understanding that that may be with us for some time too. And just make sure that we consider that then when we're thinking about what do we need as an organisation. And I think the other thing is the council is absolutely committed to protecting jobs where at all possible. And if we're going to make that commitment, then we need to find a way to make sure that we can grow our organisation, develop the skill sets, have staff that are flexible within roles, and all of that then is going to add to that flexibility. So I think that would support any changing priorities if we've got the workforce planning correct. So I'm sure that that'll come out of the project as we develop it further.
Carolyn.
Thank you for letting me come back in again, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points. Raymond, we've been talking about the point that it was rolled out in 2017. I just don't think, actually, to be fair, that we really supported the managers as actively as we perhaps should have done as a council. I think the managers have the tools there, but they don't always know how to use them effectively. I think maybe we weren't even measuring the managers on whether they were using the tools or not. I mean, we expect it, but if you don't measure the managers against it, then the chances are they won't do it. They'll prioritise other things. So I think it's about how we assess and measure what the manager's doing. And also the data wasn't always available. They're not friendly systems to allow managers to do them. So it's all part of that whole, yes, we rolled it out, but we didn't really roll it out. We didn't embed it, I think. We rolled it out, we didn't embed it. I think we have done a couple of things, though, on workforce planning, which we've done really well. And I know this is not here to talk about this, but we knew we had an ageing workforce, and we have actually rolled out a really successful modern apprenticeship programme, which isn't just for young people. So I think that we're starting to think about the long-term issues that Liz was talking about. How can we do things differently? How do we deal with the long-term strategic challenges that the organisation has? And I think COVID has given us an opportunity, because it's proved that we can do things differently, and we can work more flexibly. We can work from home. We can work from in different locations, but we don't always have the tools to support that. So the IT structure, the equipment, and all that sort of stuff is all part of workforce planning, because you can't just say to somebody, OK, that's great, you can work from home, but actually, if you don't know how to use the equipment properly, and then we've had to rush to do that. But this is something that is actually quite positive out of COVID, which I think we can be embedding in. And the only other thing I wanted to talk about was something that Muriel mentioned, that you do know your team really well, or you should know your team really well if you're the manager. And that's great, but only you know about it, what skills they have, what ambitions they have, what are they interested in. And John picked the bit up as when you go into a redundancy or a restructuring, we're asking people, what do they want to do? What skills have they brought? You know, what opportunities are there? But it's not very proactive. Now, I think that's a real challenge for an organisation to have a skill, to share skills across all functions, not just the skills you have to do the job you're doing, but the skills that you have in your back pocket that you came into the organisation with. And I can tell you nuclear physics is not one of mine, but if it was, I'd quite like the council to know about it, because actually there might be an opportunity for me to do that. So I think that is the challenge for me, is how do we share? I've never managed to crack that, by the way, in my history in HR. How do you share skills of your current workforce across the whole council, not just in teams, or not just when a restructuring is going on? And I think that's something we could aspire to and hopefully get to. Thanks.
Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to make a couple of points on workforce planning and flexible workforce. I think first and foremost, we have to recognise in any organisation, and particularly an organisation the size of the Highland Council, the strength of the organisation is in its people, is in its staff, and the skill sets that our staff have. And always when someone retires, we say, well, that's been, all their skills and all their expertise and experience has gone. But hopefully not all their expertise, because they've imparted it with their colleagues, and they've all shared from it. But to give you a couple of quick examples, I remember coming across a site manager who said his biggest challenge was on a Monday morning when, as a result of a big weekend, he said, I never had a forklift operator. Now, we use forklift operators in our libraries. And the reason I know that is I've bought ex-council forklift trucks for organisations from local authorities. So all of a sudden, the whole process grinds to a halt because the forklift truck driver is off ill or off hungover on a Monday morning. I'm giving the example of a building site here. And the chap in question, he said, I'm going to learn to become a forklift operator. And I made sure that he was and his foreman was, and that if ever that need arose, because you're in breach of insurance if all of a sudden you move, whether it's a pallet of books or a pallet of whatever, building materials from one side of a site to another. And that's good workforce planning. So the whole thing, you don't arrive at the site and say, why has nothing happened today? Oh, forklift truck driver never arrived in, forklift operator didn't arrive. You know, these are the things that we can look at. Same with first aiders. If all of a sudden we say our first aider has been promoted, they're now in a different block or in a different part of the organisation, we need to make sure we've got sufficient numbers of first aiders. And so it's an ongoing process. And many of our European staff that have come and joined the council have got a great range of skills. And the point was made earlier on, they may have started and just to get into the organisation at a lower level job than their skill set. And we need to know what their skill set is, because lo and behold, if they're an electrician or if they're, you know, bilingual, obviously almost all of them would be, but they've got other skills that we could be putting to good use. And rather than us go to recruit outside, we say, actually, that lady who works in that department doing that job, she's got this, this and this, and she's a driver. Same with drivers. It's very important that we get drivers, because as we saw in COVID, you can redeploy people all over the place. Sorry, I can't drive. Oh, okay. So we need to be encouraging them in their own time to be, you know, things that they would be good at. And even for our own insurance, if we've got staff who've improved their driving, gone on advanced motorist courses, that can be something that reduces our incidences of accidents and could overall reduce our insurance costs. So it's an ongoing process, but I think we need to know what everybody's good skill sets are. As I say, that's the strength of any organisation. And if our local authority was parked right in the middle of central Scotland, and we, you know, at the blink of an eye, we could lose half our good staff to a rival or a local authority without them having to relocate house, we would be very sharp on looking after who's the best of our people. We should be looking after all of our people and bringing them on in terms of their skill set, because that's what will make them loyal to us, and it strengthens our organisation going forward. Thank you.
John.
Yeah, it was just a couple of points to get back to. Actually, one was what Duncan mentioned, and the fact that actually what we did, what as a council we did in, I think it was the Nairn depot, is we actually trained up a number of men who were not able to drive, and as a council we put them through learning to drive and paid for the driving test, so that if the drivers were not there, we had spare capacity. So as an organisation, we are actually doing things like that. We could do more, without a doubt, but that is an example of us as an organisation, as an employer, actually making sure that we did have enough drivers in that depot to do it. And another thing, I think it was Caroline that mentioned it, and then I just want to talk about training courses that we're doing. We have, I think it was mentioned at the recovery board on Wednesday, that we have quite a lot of different type of training, online training, and we actually have quite a number of mandatory training courses that we expect some managers to be able to, they have to undertake them. But at the present moment, we don't have the ability to record if everybody who should have done that has done that. So though we may have mandatory training courses, at the moment, we do not have the ability to make sure all of those who should have undertaken it has actually undertaken it. So it's okay to say we've got mandatory training courses, but if we can't make sure that everybody undertakes them, so that is an issue that we may need to look at in the future from an HR point of view. Thank you.
That's a good point, John. Muriel.
John, thank you for that. I think it's important, and I believe passionate this, that the training should be updated and easily available to any manager or any HR person to see online, to make sure that we can give the support. For instance, if I had missed my health and safety training, but then I'd missed it because I'd been off sick for 6 months, there should be a note in that. So you're absolutely right. And I think personally, I think that's an easy fix. It's an easy IT fix and should be available.
Okay. No one else is indicating they've got any contributions to make. So members, you're really just asked to note the progress. And I just remind you that there is another meeting of the redesign board on the 27th of November, which will also deal with workforce planning and possibly other parallel streams that we're doing at the same time.